The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Ed Milliband.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I move the amendment standing in the name of my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, my name and other honourable friends. Mr Deputy Speaker, before I address the legislation today, I want to express my deep condolences for the families of the two people killed by Storm Isha and sympathy for all of those facing power cuts and disruption from the storm. Mr Deputy Speaker, the legislation we're considering today won't cut bills, it won't give us energy security, it drives a coach and horses through our climate commitments, and it learns nothing from the worst cost of living crisis in memory that the British people are still going through. A cost of living crisis caused by our dependence on fossil fuels. And since its launch 2 months ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, the case for this bill has disintegrated upon contact with reality. Let me remind the House of the series of unfortunate events that have befallen the bill since its publication. On day one, launch day, the Energy Secretary went on TV with the big reveal, telling the public that the bill wouldn't cut bills. Next, we discovered from the confidential minutes of the North Sea Transition Authority that they thought the bill was unnecessary and compromised their independence. Then Lord the honourable gentleman says from a sedentary position that it's not the case. That's not the case. He's wrong. Let me just read him the minutes. The board expressed a unanimous view that such a proposal was not necessary for the NSTA. The board noted the proposal would significantly challenge one of the tenets of the independence for the NSTA. Of course I give way to.
As the right honourable gentleman is enjoyably quoting the minutes, not on the record of the NSTA, would he also support their position that we should maximise all of the oil and gas production in the North Sea?
Absolutely right.
That's not the NSTA's position, as I've discussed with them, Mr Deputy Speaker. So then Lord Brown, the former CEO of BP, attacked the bill and said it was going to, and I quote, not make any difference to energy security. Then Britain's most respected climate expert, Lord Stern, pilloried it as, and I quote, a deeply damaging mistake. Then on the eve of COP, the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, who signed net zero into law, said she disagreed with the bill. I don't think she supports Just Stop Oil, to my knowledge. She disagrees with the bill. Of course I don't. Then the former COP president. Let's be serious. Then the former COP president, a man respected around the world, who we are lucky to have playing that role at COP26, said this, that the bill was smoke and mirrors, not being serious, the opposite of what we agreed to do internationally. And finally, their own net zeros are the man they entrusted to guide them on questions of climate energy. He's so disgusted by the bill that he's not in the chamber today. In fact, he's so ashamed, Mr Deputy Speaker, that he has fled to the Chiltern Hundreds. I mean, that's certainly getting a long way away from the Honourable Lady and her policies. I mean, it does show how far people will go. Not so much the oil and gas extraction bill, but the Conservative MP extraction bill that she is putting forward in the House today. And in his words, I can no longer condone nor continue to support a government that is committed to a course of action that I know is wrong and will cause future harm. Now, I think we should take all of these voices, Lord Brown, the former Prime Minister, the former Net Zero Czar, the former COP President. I think we should. I'll come to all of the arguments she made if she'll give me a minute as I develop my argument. Because the bigger point is this, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We face massive challenges as a country, but it's not the scale of our problems that is so apparent today, it's the smallness of their response. A two-clause, risible bill that she knows is not going to make any difference to our energy security because everyone who knows anything about this subject says it. Now, as this bill has fallen apart, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they've thrashed around to try and find a rational justification, and they've made one futile argument after another, and let's take each in turn. Right, first of all, the first argument was this bill will cut prices. And in case you're thinking, well, did they really make that claim? They did, because the claim was made by the Prime Minister in a tweet at 9:57 a.m. on launch day, when he said the bill will, and I quote, help reduce energy bills as we're less exposed. Oh, she nods, but I want to put on record my thanks to the Energy Secretary, because she's been an internal one-woman rebuttal unit against the Prime Minister, because she went on breakfast TV. I mean, actually, she went on breakfast TV before the tweet, so it's sort of pre-buttal, you might call it. And she said this, the bill, and I quote, wouldn't necessarily bring down energy bills. That's not what we are saying. And of course, she's right, because oil and gas is traded on international... Well, I will give way to her, definitely.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. And if he had read the full quote, it said that indirectly, through the fact that you will support the renewable sector, it brings down bills. And through the fact that you can raise tax to help people with the cost of living, it brings down bills. So if you would like to bring down bills for people in this country, you should back this bill.
Mr. Speaker, that's great, because she anticipated my rebuttal of the second bad argument for this bill, which was the argument she went on to make, because she said that the tax revenues we get from fossil fuels justify this policy. And we've heard it again today. I actually think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that if anything, this is an even more complete load of nonsense than the Prime Minister's argument, because these are the facts. It's our reliance on fossil fuels that has caused rocketing energy bills. This meant the government was forced to step in to provide support for households. They should just listen, for support for households and businesses. And the cost to government of the support with bills has far outweighed any tax revenues. According to the OBR, the windfall tax receipts that come from oil and gas companies raise £25 billion, and the cost of government support is over £70 billion, or they say £104 billion. So the idea that our dependence on fossil fuels can be justified by the tax revenues you get when they've had to spend £100 billion trying to help people is obviously nonsense. There's a third bad argument, and again we heard it today, which is that somehow this bill strengthens our energy security. And again, I think it's just important to have a few facts in this debate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because here are the facts. The UK's North Sea gas production, with new licences, is set to fall by 95% by 2050. And without new licences, by 97%. Right. So that is the equivalent of 4 days of our current gas demand. So all of this absolute codswallop about the idea that this is guaranteeing our energy security, that this is somehow going to guarantee these 200,000 jobs, it's just risible nonsense, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And here's the thing, because I think we've actually had a real revelation in this debate, because they've admitted the truth, which is that the vast majority of oil is not used in this country. And it is exported elsewhere. And 70%... And here's the thing, 70% of our remaining reserves are oil, not gas. So the truth is that the idea this makes any difference to our energy security is nonsense. These are private companies selling on the private market, and they have absolutely no response. Now, the fourth bad argument is that this bill will somehow protect jobs. And it's wrong again. And look, we owe it to oil and gas communities to protect them in the transition. But given their record in constituencies like mine, we won't take lectures from the Conservative Party on just transitions. And the truth is, and this is the truth that we should admit in this House, the fossil fuel market is not just deeply unstable for consumers, because that is what's happened over the last 2 years. It's deeply unstable for workers. And pretending that new licenses will somehow guarantee the jobs for North Sea workers is a total illusion. Just in the last 10 years, the number of people working in oil and gas has more than halved. The International Energy Agency predicts a peak in fossil fuel demand by 2030. That's why the head of the IEA says this: new large-scale fossil fuel projects not only carry major climate risks, but also business and financial risks for the companies and their investors. And that applies to workers too. Now, the right way to have a managed transition in the North Sea is to carry on using existing fields, which a Labour government will do, and to have a plan for North Sea workers by driving forward with jobs in the industries of the future: offshore wind, carbon capture and hydrogen. But that's not what they've done. We had a graphic example of this last week. The world's largest floating wind prototype sits off Peterhead. That's a good thing. But it needed maintenance. Where did the maintenance happen? Not in Scotland, not anywhere in the UK. It's being towed back to Norway. That is the scale of their industrial policy failure, which we know very, very well. They haven't generated the jobs here that the British workers deserve. And of course, their fossil fuel policy and net zero rollback has sent a terrible message to investors around the world. This is Amanda Blank, the CEO of Aviva and the head of their own UK Transition Plan Task Force. This is what she says about oil and gas and their position. This puts at clear risk the jobs, growth and the additional investment the UK requires to become more climate ready. It is Britain, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is Britain losing the global race for clean energy jobs that will destroy the future of oil and gas communities. They have no proper plan for those workers. We do have a proper plan. And the fifth, I will.
I'm really grateful to him for giving way. Can I just say, does he agree with me that this bill is an absolute disaster for climate diplomacy? Yep. Turning diligent negotiators into hypocrites and trashing our international negotiations and international reputation. Isn't it clear without proper diplomacy, future generations are going to be left with a much more dangerous and less stable world?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, and she takes me on to the fifth and final bad argument that they are making, which is that somehow I will in a moment, which that somehow this bill can be justified on climate grounds. Now, making this argument demands a level of absurdity that should make even this government deeply embarrassed. Let's just get this straight. We have signed a global agreement at COP28 for a transition away from fossil fuels in line with the science. That science is unequivocal. We must leave the majority of fossil fuels in the ground. But at home, their domestic policy is what they call maxing out the North Sea. Yeah. So let's get this clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In the coming crucial 2 years, government ministers will be travelling around the world to try and turn that agreement to COP28 into reality. But how will the conversation go? The UK minister will say to other countries, we want you to leave your fossil fuels in the ground, because that's the agreement at COP28. And then the country we're trying to persuade will say to us, but hang on a minute, you're saying we should leave our fossil fuels in the ground, but you're planning to extract all of yours. Literally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I mean, what will we say? Other than, well, yes, the government is practising total hypocrisy, but please do as we say, not as we do. I mean, that is the truth. The science is unequivocal. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
To the right honourable gentleman for giving way. I was hoping to get in when he was speaking about jobs and investment, because he quoted an awful lot of people, and I wonder, why did he not quote Sir Ian Wood, who said of Labour's plans for the North Sea oil and gas industry, they would, and I quote, place in jeopardy tens of thousands of jobs. And David Whitehouse of Offshore Energy UK, their chief executive, said Labour's plans would create a cliff edge, deterring investment and heightening our risk of energy shortages. Why did he not mention these people?
Well, look, I'm very happy to talk about Ian Wood. We had a very good round table with Ian Wood in Aberdeen in November. And look, I totally accept that it's for government of either party to show there is a proper transition plan. I firmly believe that we can do it. But I honestly say to the honourable gentleman, the idea that new licences is somehow going to guarantee a future for those North Sea workers, he knows that's not the case. How can you possibly say that 4 days worth of oil and worth of gas demand in 2050 is somehow going to guarantee a future for those workers? I was talking. I will.
Grateful to the right gentleman. He will know that 10% of our current oil consumption is used in manufacturing industry, not to be burnt, but for things like lubricants, solvents, and actually for electronic components. So it doesn't contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Is it acceptable to extract them from UK waters?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the honourable gentleman, 80% of what we get from UK waters is exported, not produced here. And we've said very clearly, we will continue with existing oil and gas fields. We're continuing with those things. Of course there has to be a transition. But the idea that we can just carry on regardless and max out the North Sea, and I know he cares about climate. I know he cares about this. And I do think it's very important in this to listen to the voices. I mean, there must be a reason why the International Energy Agency, the Energy Transitions Commission, the Climate Change Committee, the former president of COP26, Nick Stern, Lord Stern. I mean, these are the people who are the respected authorities on climate, and they all say, look, the world is genuinely on a burning platform. And unless we address the issue of fossil fuels, we're going to head not to 1.5 degrees, but to 3 degrees of warming. And that is the truth. That is the truth. And it is incredibly hard to do this. So the idea that we're going to say, well, look, yes, there's a climate crisis. Yes, this won't make any difference to our energy security. Yes, as the Energy Secretary says, it won't cut bills. Yes, it's not the answer for jobs of the future. But we're going to carry on doing it anyway. I mean, that is climate vandalism. I genuinely say that to the right honourable gentleman who cares about these issues. He and I have he shadowed me 15 years ago, a long time ago. I know he cares about these issues. Along with the honourable member for Reading West, people who really care about these issues have wrestled with this question. We've listened to the experts and we've thought to ourselves, look, what does the science tell us on the one hand, and what difference will this make on the other? And I think fair-minded people have reached the conclusion that I've reached, that Lord Stern has reached, and all the other authorities that we... Of course I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I previously raised in this chamber the progress report from the Climate Change Committee, which said the government was off track. The Secretary of State then assured the House that the government remains extremely ambitious about climate change. So does my honourable friend agree that the Secretary of State must have meant she is supportive of causing climate change, given that she is pressing ahead with the new oil and gas licenses?
Look, I don't believe that this sort of fulfills the kind of climate leadership that we pride ourselves on in this country. And I know when I went to COP28, we're saying, I mean, here's another interesting fact for the House. UKEF, UK Export Finance, I think with the guidance of the right honourable member for Reading West, decided at COP26 we won't finance oil and gas projects abroad. Now, there must be a reason why UKEF decided that. And presumably the reason is because we want to make the transition away from fossil fuels. So at the same time as UKEF deciding that we're not going to do that, again, we look like hypocrites if we do this by saying, well, we're just going to carry on maxing out at home. So I know there are other people who want to speak, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we have a bill. Oh, go on. It's very tempting. So I'll give way to the...
Very grateful. The right honourable gentleman, I'm grateful to give way. The right honourable gentleman spoke for an awful long time, and I suspect he's coming to the end of his speech, so that backbenchers can participate. Not one idea has he put into the floor of this House what Labour would do were they to take over from us.
I'll tell him I'll tell him exactly what we do. I'm really grateful to him for intervening. Sorry, he's lengthened my speech. We'd establish a national wealth fund to invest in British jobs, to give a future in steel and automotive and investing in our ports. We'd set up GB Energy to generate wealth for our citizens. If it's good enough for countries abroad, why isn't it good enough for us? We insulate homes across this country. We'd finally lift the onshore wind ban, the disgraceful onshore wind ban that's adding £180 to every family in this country's bills. That's just a start. I don't want to detain the House for too long, but there's plenty more where that came from. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the truth is, I won't give way. The truth is that there are two roads for Britain's future: driving to clean energy by 2030 to cut bills and make us energy independent, GB Energy to bring jobs in clean energy here at home and be a climate leader, or a government that takes the wrong path, clings to expensive, insecure fossil fuels and makes the British people pay the price as they have for the past 14 years. The truth is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill speaks volumes about a government out of ideas and embarked on that second path. This bill is one of the last desperate acts of a dying government. I urge the House to support our reasoned amendment and vote against their bill tonight.